Hello, this section is entitled Assigning Users to Predefined IAM Roles Within a Project. And here IAM stands for Identity and Access Management. So broadly, what Identity and Access Management has to do with is granting others some level of access to the resources that you create in your project. And the key principle here is that people do not have access unless you grant them access. And that's the concept of security principle of least privilege. Let's talk about some terms before we look at an example. First, permissions are sort of the atomic unit of permissioning or of access. And basically the way they're created is they're described in three parts: a service, a resource, and verb. So I'll describe it in a particular example. So in this case, PubSub, the service, is some feature of Google Cloud Platform. And then subscription is a kind of resource. So within a PubSub feature, there are something called subscriptions, and those are actual resources. And then the last one, the verb, is what you can do with that resource. In this case, you can consume a resource. So permissions are these three-part entities, and that's it. Now the next concept is called a role, and that is a collection of permissions. So that's typically because a person, when they need to do something in a project, they typically don't need to do just one thing. They actually have lots of different operations that they typically need to do, and those are all collected underneath a role. And as a matter of fact, when we talked about when you grant people access to your project, you actually grant them roles, not individual permissions. So never do you actually directly assign a permission to a particular user. You actually grant roles. So far, I've been talking about users. What I mean here in this case is broadly the category called identities. And in this particular video, we're only going to talk about one kind of identity, and that is another Google account as identified by their email address. So when you think about users right now, you should just be thinking Google accounts. Okay? And then the last thing is we've been talking about mapping these roles to the identities, to the Google account. That's actually called a policy. So that when you create that mapping between a user and the roles that they have, that is a policy. Now, where do these policies get created at? There's two levels you can create them at. One is at the resource level. That means for that particular resource, that user has that set of permissions, right? A grouping of permissions, and then they'll operate on that particular resource. It's more common, however, and you can only do that kind of mapping for resources on particular kinds of resources. Not all resources allow you to create these policies at their level. It's more common to typically grant permissions or grant roles precisely at the project level, which means any resource that fits that permission in that project is now granted. So we'll look at that by example. So we'll go back to our training main project we created in the last video here, right? And there is a menu called IAM and admin, and there's an IAM button. And you can see here a screen. And matter of fact, what you're looking at here is a policy, and that policy is mapping the identity, in this case a Google user called training.larkintuckerllc@gmail.com, to the role of owner. Okay. Let's go ahead and edit this. I'm going to show you what kinds of roles exist. So there are generally three kinds of roles that you can create or interact with in the system. One is what's called basic roles. In fact, there's a list right here. There's 4 of them. Browser, editor, owner, and viewer, right? So that's one category. We'll get into detail in a second about that. Then the second one is there's a bunch of predefined roles, and you see this list goes on forever. This is a very long list, right? There's hundreds of them, maybe thousands of them. Okay, and basically different features. Obviously, you're looking at different features of Google, and underneath there, they've created these roles. And then again, underneath each of these roles is a bunch of permissions. Okay, and then the third one is you can actually create what's called custom roles, where you can define what permissions are in that role. We'll talk about that in a later video. So for now, we're going to focus on just the basic roles. So browser is kind of the least, has the least level of access. It basically just allows you to see the project. You can't even do anything within the project. But you can at least see the project. So that's what browser is. Not terribly useful, to be honest. The next level of access is called viewer, and lets you basically have read-only access to all the resources in the project. So you can at least see them, see what their values are. You cannot change them. Next level is editor. So now you have read-write access, right? And which means you could also now change most any resource. I say most. You're not going to be able to touch basically things in IAM. So you're not going to be able to add roles, right? Or create, or maybe create policies, more importantly. So you can't really change the security of the project, but you can do anything else. And then owner is the highest level of access in a project, and that allows you, in addition to all read-write, you also have access to all the security. Means you can now create policies to map other people into your project, right? It also has access to the billing connection for the project, and we'll talk about billing in a later video. Okay, so these are the 4 basic roles, and in this case, we want to do is we're going to, let me get out of this. I'm going to create a new policy. I've got another Google account, okay, that I've already created, and I want to grant them viewer access to this project, which means they can view any resource in this project. So if I hit add, see if I can get this right. Okay, new member, phil.larkin.tucker.llc.com, LLC, no, at gmail.com. There it is right here. So it found the name, right? So then I want to grant this identity, in this case a Google account, viewer access, basic, viewer, right? And we'll talk about conditions later. So now we're just talking about Phil. Phil's going to have viewer access to the training main project. I say save, and you can see that entry here. Now let's see if this actually worked. So what I should be able to do now is switch over. I have already logged in viewer Phil in an incognito window, right? And I want to just reload the screen and see if I can see this project. Select project. Oh, good. So if you recall in the last video, that the projects that a person sees in this screen is not projects that you necessarily own. It's some project that you have some relationship to. And actually, we can talk about what that means. It really means is if you have some level of permission, right? You've been assigned some role in that project, then you would see it here. And so I can see training main here. And you notice that now I'm in the project. Now, I guess in this case, I've not created any resources in this project, so there's nothing much for me to see. But if there was any resources, see this project has no resources, but if there's resources, I can view them. I just can't change them as Phil. Okay, let's go back here. Okay, now the next concept is, so I'm going to pause the video for a second here, see if I can pause the video, and then we'll talk about the last topic. Okay, the last talk we're going to do is we're going to create another project called training marketing, let's say, and we are going to then grant Phil ownership of that project, so he can now fully manage that project. And we'll notice there's a subtle difference about how granting ownership is from just granting something like viewer. And we'll just do it by example. So what I'm going to do first, in order to create a project, I'm back in as my original training user, and I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to call it Training Marketing. And okay, I got my project name, my project ID, that looks good. Okay, hit create. It's going to take a second to create. Okay, the project's now created. I'm going to go here. It's not quite created yet. Now it's created. I'm going to switch to that training marketing. Okay, so you can see now I'm in a different project. And what I'm going to do here, so you notice that, again, I'm in a different project, so I don't see, I have a different set of policies, right? Because this one is new. So I'm going to say add here. For training marketing, I'm going to go back to Phil again. Phil Larkin Tucker LLC at gmail.com. And I'm going to say this time I'm going to grant him basic owner. And I'm going to say, in this case, well, actually I'm going to hit save here. So now you notice one thing's different here. See this little block right here? It says invitation. Even though I didn't check the box to send the email, it actually does say invitation sent. So here, when you grant ownership of a project, it doesn't automatically grant it to them. It actually sends them an invitation, and then they have to accept it. Then they become owners. So let's see what this looks like. So if I go back to here, I'm back on my incognito window, and I want to go to Google, and I want to go to my Gmail, and I should see an email here. It says, got an email, it says join my project. Hello Phil, I invite you to this project. Click on this link, and so the owner has invited you, so you accept the invitation, and now I can see training marketing. And as a matter of fact, if I log in, I'm in as Phil, and I go to IAM, you can see that. So training, the person who created the project is an owner, and so am I, as I'm Phil. And then if I go back to this screen and just refresh this, you can see that the little warning triangle is gone, and now Phil is a true owner of this project. Okay, that's it for this video. Thank you.